This week's episode is part one of a two-part series. So sit back, relax, pop open the bottle, and enjoy the show. And happy Thanksgiving to everyone. All right, Mr. Dan. You over here.
This one's a toughie. It's a good sign, though.
Wait, what does it mean when it's hard to open?
Usually means natural cork. It also usually means that the cork stayed wet. Wine is stored on its side, so the wine always stays in contact with the cork. If the wine isn't touching the cork, the cork doesn't stay wet. It will dry out and shrink and allow oxygen in. All wine, if you're storing it, should be stored on its side so that the wine is always touching the cork. If you have issues getting the cork out, it means it didn't dry out because it would have shrank and you could have blown in, it would have popped out. Whereas if it is impossible to get out, it means it was probably stored right. Look, see how it's bloating up?
Yeah.
It means it stayed moist. It means it didn't dry out. It means that the structure of the cork is stable so that the wine is good. It's a good thing, not a bad thing.
All right, awesome. Shoot.
If it comes out too easy, then it probably was not preserved very well. Now imagine this is a 19, so it's pushing 2.5 years since it's been bottled. Good that they kept the cork wet. That, again, will mean that the wine is preserved well. And you can often see if it dried out, the red will start rising up the cork, which means the cork, notice how it's thicker on this side than that side? That's the wet side, right? Mm-hmm. So it's bloated up. The dry side's thinner, right? Mm-hmm. If this dries out, the moisture will come up the sides and get more of the cork red. Oh. So you can see that was perfect, right?
Oh, yeah. Wow.
You can tell by looking at it, it didn't work its way up the sides. It stayed bloated on that end. That means this is probably a very well-kept bottle of wine.
Oh, might as well start with that one then.
Well, it's red, so we're going to want to go with that last.
Oh, we're gonna.
And we'll
I
get
see.
into that.
I see. And I don't even have multiple glasses for us, but while you're doing that, let me do the intro, get the show on the road. What's up? What's good? What to do, everybody? Welcome everyone back yet to another episode of Just Jiving, here with your host Tarek. I got with me Dan, the man over here, and true Just Jiving fans over here, the true members of the Just Jive crew. They remember this motherfucker from, gosh, it's been over a year. I think
pandemics and such, for sure.
Yeah, it's been over a year since I've had you on the show. But we are back again, baby. Drinking more wine. Gonna be doing a little bit more wine talk over here with the resident sommelier. Dan, say hello to the people.
Hello, everyone.
He's getting his shit together right now.
I brought some of my favorites.
Well, but before we do get into that, y'all remember to like, subscribe, share this podcast, do all that engagement with the content. Follow the Instagram at just_jiving with 2 N's, the Twitter page at jiving with 2 N's _podcast, and the Facebook page at Just Jiving. And if you have any inquiries or topics you think I can rant and rave on about, then be sure to send that to the Instagram at just_jiving. Dan, what we got today?
I brought some of my favorites from the Campania region of Italy. I want to make sure we created a video that gave some insight to some excellent wines anyone can source and enjoy from one of my, as we spoke of, most favorite wine regions on earth. And these will give a wide range of ideas of some of the varietals that they grow there, some of the treasures, and some good price points so everyone can enjoy.
Okay, cool. Well then, let's get started. I'm really excited because I'm excited to hear what you have to say, Sir Dan, about these wines right now. So what we starting with over here? Because I'm not a sommelier, so let's simplify it.
Well, as we spoke of before, I wanted to go over a slight amount of that history about Campania. You know how we love that history.
I do love history.
As we had talked about, Napoli, or Naples, the capital of Campania, originally settled by the Greeks in like 800 BC. the merge of the Etruscans from Tuscany and the Greeks from Greece, who settled Campania as Magna Graeca, Great Greece, far before Rome even existed. The Etruscans from Tuscany and the Greeks from Greece, who settled in Campania, kind of merged to create the culture of what Campania is. There was a point in time where Napoli was the second most populated city in all of Europe. It is a super history city from a super history region, which, as we've spoke of, to me really is the continuation of Greece, Rome, and the story of the West, which we are a part of in America. And so I have a passion for the grapes, the white and the red grapes of this region, the region's history, and how these grapes are indigenous to this region, that they could have been lost through all the conflict that region has been through over the last 2,000 years. Mastro Bernardino, probably one of the most influential people, winemakers, grape growers, and influencers of the Campania region, saved a lot of these varietals from extinction. Now we've been able to cultivate these vines, bring them back, focus on quality, and turn out wines that could potentially be the best white wines of Italy and potentially the best red wine of Italy.
All right, sir.
And so I'm eager to get into it.
Okay, sir. Well, what is the first wine of this region that we shall ingest?
We're going to start with the Greco di Tufo. I want to make sure to mention, while we're at it, that we pre-opened all of the wines beforehand.
Is that a problem?
European Union law says they're allowed to put 150 milligrams of sulfur dioxide in every white wine. The Fiano is a 2019. The Greco di Tufo is a 2017. The Falangina is a 2018. None of these bottles would have been able to last on the shelf if there was not sulfur dioxide added to these as preservatives. Many people view sulfur in wine as a negative. Without sulfur dioxide, we would not be able to preserve any fine wine of earth. It is organic. It's sourced from the earth. European Union says by law we can add 150 milligrams to a white, max 80 milligrams to a red. As we mentioned, reds have preservatives in the tannins of the skins, and so they don't need as much. Whites typically don't have the opportunity for tannins to be leached from the skins into the juice, and so they need more sulfur dioxide to preserve.
Okay.
When you open a wine, natural oxygen touching the wine causes the sulfur dioxide to dissipate. And so I want to make sure we mention that as just a important lesson, that any white wine from the old world, they had to add sulfur dioxide to preserve it. The sulfur dioxide will naturally create a smell almost like rotten eggs, and that smell will naturally dissipate incredibly quickly off all white wine and a little slower off of red wine. Although, again, there's not as many milligrams of sulfur dioxide in
But there
red
isn't.
wine as
But there
white.
is sulfur dioxide in all.
All wine.
Okay.
There might be sulfurless wines where they didn't add it, but those wines are meant to be drank very quickly, usually only offered in local environments where they'll be consumed in the local environment. And if they're going to be shipped, stored, or sent anywhere else on Earth without the sulfur, it will not last in bottle. With all that said, we pre-opened all the whites so that that egg smell could potentially, likely, very quickly dissipate off these wines, so we get to enjoy them the way they should be enjoyed.
Well, all right.
Obviously, with reds, especially these reds, using grapes that are big, bold, and structured grapes, it's a good time to let them open up, fade some of their sulfur dioxide off from oxygen contact, as well as the oxygen being able to cause oxygenic enzymes inside the red wine to react, causing them to release fruit profiles. That's why typically we'll let red wine open and breathe before we enjoy it.
So the oxygen in
the character.
So oxygen for the red wine, it releases the fruit aromas or whatnot, but for the white wine, it's just getting rid of that
Absolutely.
rotten egg kind of sulfur dioxide smell.
100%. I also want to mention that we did not chill any of these whites. And so, although you won't be able to taste it, all these whites would be better enjoyed at 51 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Reds between 59 and 64.
Okay. Well, I'm not gonna sit here and be like, whoa, you didn't chill my wine, Dad, so I can't
Well,
drink it.
since I plan on leaving these bottles for you when I leave, I don't think you're going to be too picky about it. But
Oh gosh.
we'll start with the Fiano. I love Fiano. It's my favorite white Italian grape. It is unbelievably unique as an Italian white grape. It is vastly different in profile and character from almost any other Italian white grape, if not every one of them.
That smells really good, damn.
A big detail is they say this might be the most noble white of Italy. Noble is like nobility, right? And only nobility can come from indigenous people who are royal, right? Think about like England. And so royal varietals of Italy would be traditional varietals indigenous to their regions, meaning they didn't come from anywhere else. They're Italy's varietals themselves, that they are so unique that there's a relatively easy way to separate their character and their style from other Italian whites.
So
I believe that Fiano is probably the most individual and unique white grape of Italy as a whole, and that, in my opinion, makes it the pinnacle of royalty and the most noble white grape of Italy, in my opinion.
So do these grapes? I'm curious. These grapes, like, can you just pop them in and just eat them, or are they, do they taste like bitter or sour if they're not made for wine or something like that? Because whenever I think of grapes, honestly, I only think of the ones that you can eat. So I'm guessing that these are different. I'm guessing these aren't eating grapes.
Absolutely. And yet, all over Earth, grapes are ripened to different sugar levels. Some grapes are ripened to unbelievably high bricks, as we call it in America. Or there's an Ashley scale in, I believe, Germany. The Klostenberger Mostwage scale in Austria. And so around Earth, we have different ways to quantify the level of sugar inside of a grape.
Okay.
In cooler regions, think of it this way, Tarek. The farther you get from the equator, so far north in the Champagne region, those grapes are not going to be ripened to a high sugar level. It would be more important in those wines to preserve the acidity. And so I would imagine if you pick a grape off of a champagne vine, it's not going to be very sweet and it's going to be very acidic. Whereas if you're picking a grape off of a very, very ripe Zinfandel vine from California, ripened to a potential alcohol in the amount of sugar in the grape of about 15% alcohol, I would imagine those grapes would be much sweeter, have more ripe characteristics.
I don't get a lot of sweetness in this one.
There shouldn't be, because with white wine, in my opinion, the true treasure, and it seems as if I share an opinion with what I would hope to be seen as a traditional standard of dry white wine across Earth, that the acidity is the true treasure. And so we want to preserve acidity. We want it to make us salivate. We want it to, because we salivate, it sends a signal to the brain that it inspires hunger as an aperitif, or that it draws us back in because the salivation makes us want more.
That is very true. I did finish. I'm just like, oh, that's really good.
It should be juicy. It should be very juicy. It should make you gush up. Like if you were to open your mouth and put your hand down, you'd start dripping your own juiciness, your own saliva. You know what I'm saying?
I see. Okay, I was getting that. Yeah, I was wondering if that was just my mouth not working or something. But
to judge the ripeness of a white, I find it easier in the nose. And so we're trying to make a determination of what fruits we're identifying in the nose.
Okay.
Of course, I can put this to the nose. Identify apple, green apple, which means it's not a ripe version of an apple, right? As Jay Fletcher once said, you can pretty much put your nose into most white wines on earth and say lemon and lime. Those aren't ripe, right? It can get real intricate, like lemon pith, lime zest, lime juice.
And there's none of that actually in the wine. It's just
Absolutely not. It's just the character that a grape can duplicate of other things, right? Seldomly do we take a wine and put it to our nose and say, well, this smells like Welch's grape. It smells like white grapes. Smells like red grapes.
Smells like Smuckers.
We put it to our nose and we identify everything it smells like that is not grapes. What I want to really point out when it comes to old world white wines, the greatest power they have when they're grown with the old world perspective is showing the land they were grown on.
That's
When
that
Fiano
terroir you talking
nicely done,
about?
Tarek. When we drink a Fiano from Avellino, they have determined that Avellino is the best region in all of Italy to grow that grape. The grape will grab characteristics of the soil and show them through the end product of the wine. The
So do you?
minerality, the aroma, the characteristics you should be able to sense from this region as close as it is to volcanoes, volcanic soils, minerality elements. And I absolutely get steely, sharp, almost like the smell of wet steel, like a wet stone or
Kind of.
that is the minerality of the region being shown through the end product of the wine.
Like a little
And so the
bit of
majesty
metallicness
of
on
this
that
grape,
back end.
100%. The majesty of this grape is being able to show its sense of place, where the vine itself was grown, so that you can taste a sense of the place where this wine came from. Fiano is excellent at showing the land it was grown on, the terroir through the end product of the wine in the nose and on the palate. And you would drink this wine and pretty easily identify that it's not overly ripe, high acidity, with some aroma characteristics of potentially a mildly ripe wine, like some peach or apricot, which
That's
would be a little
interesting.
higher on the ripe fruit scale than lemon or lime, and obviously not to the scale of like prune or fig.
Do you like wine because of its complexity and how, or is it the history of the regions that make the wine? Is it both? Because I'm curious, like because I can sit here and tell you why I love beer because it tastes good.
What I like about wine is in 3,000 years, we've learned how to take the chaos inherent to the entire farming and growing process of wine all over Earth with dozens of different variables. And as human beings, in our study and our observation, refined it into the order that we have now. It is a wonder of the world of 3,000 years of human history that we've taken such chaos and refined it to such beauty. And the process of that in every region on Earth, by everyone who is invested in every one of those vines like they're their children, like they're my girls. That is a investment and a passion in turning out that order out of the chaos that we've had to adjust to and learn and continue adjusting to every single year. To me, it's just an epic feat of human proportion.
I see. So it's like every time you drink wine, it's kind of like you're reminding yourself of what it's like to, be human and overcome all of these things, all this time, the turmoil.
We had a passion for it. It wasn't just like we stumbled through it. We wanted to make this perfect.
Yeah, we wanted, exactly.
You know what
like,
I'm saying?
Yeah.
We took all that chaos and all the chaos we're given every single year with, as we've mentioned, over 4 million new vintages every year. A wine that isn't the same as the one it was before. And yet every year we have to take all the chaos that is thrown at us and still trying to turn out such order. To me, it's just an epic expression of humanity.
An
that we've
epic
learned
expression of
over
humanity.
a long period of time. A long period of time that has been passed on from generation to generation. The varietals and the grapes and the things we've learned and how we have to continue adjusting to the environment around us. It is just a continual example of how majestic we've become.
I hear that. It's a feat for humans. What we got
The
this
Greco
time?
Tufo is next. This is, in my opinion, the second best white grape of Campania. It is the Greco grape of the Tufo region.
This one already smells different. I'm not getting any of that
And
metal.
in the finish, there is going to be a drastically different profile. The way a Fiano has a very rounded finish, and a Greco will have a little sharper finish. It won't be rounded by its terpene character. Both age incredibly well. Both change incredibly well over time. Both develop incredibly complex bottle age characteristic or tertiary characteristics because they have high acidity. And
I'm trying to smell. I'm trying to figure out what that smell is. It's kind of like ripe. I don't want to say fig, but
it's like ripe apple.
They're like just some kind of. Damn it. How do you just like put it up to your nose and be like, oh yeah, it has these things in it, and then they're like, yeah, you're absolutely right. That's what we were going for.
As I mentioned to you before, very few humans have put a lot of time into trying to train their brains on identifying specific scents or flavors. We eat something and we know that we're eating a lemon, but we don't eat something with our eyes closed and try to determine what we're tasting. We spend very little time training our sense of smell or our sense of palate by specifically creating those mental synapses that would give us the memory of what we experienced. And a sommelier or a wine professional has spent time trying to identify the characteristics and knowing how to define those.
I don't get that. There's less of oh my god. Now you just got me trying to figure out. Now you just got me trying to figure out what the hell this is that I'm tasting, because
it seems to have higher acidity, far more tart fruits, not the same level of ripening. I can usually tell that just from the nose. The fruit profiles are less ripe. There is a minerality aspect. It doesn't seem like whetstone, more like a limestone or chalk.
How the hell can you tell what that tastes like?
Chalk is, to a sommelier, should be one of the easiest elements to identify. Limestone is one of the most important stones or types of rock in relationship to the wine world.
Why is that?
The best way to explain what limestone is you have to imagine, like, I explain it this way. We are made up of two different things, flesh and bone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our flesh becomes the organic material. Our bones become the chalk. And so 300 million years ago, there are these bivalve squid-like things, and a squid would have less bone and more organic material, right? And then there are these crustacean, orange starfish-looking things that would probably have more bones than flesh. Imagine trillions of them in the ocean. And then, some extinction event happens. They die and they sink to the bottom of the ocean. The natural weight of all the pressure of that water condenses their bone and chalk into rock, which is called limestone.
Oh.
Former alive bone matter. Think of it in that way, right? Like chalk. It turns into, when you break it down, white dust, right?
Okay.
That chalk has a low pH level, which creates an inverse relationship for acidity to a vine. And so we want limestone soils to create acidic grapes. The best way I can say it. And so all over Earth, the pinnacle soil makeup for most wine we've identified is limestone. And so the sommelier should be trained to identify chalk from Champagne regions, from Chablis regions, from Pouilly-Fumé, from Sancerre, from Burgundy regions. Limestone is one of the pinnacle rock for wine. And so
and they put that in the soil or something?
Cannot put their nose to a wine and identify the chalky smell is not a very well educated sommelier. It might be harder to identify any other thing, but any sommelier should be able to put their nose to a wine and identify whether it has a chalky character.
And do they put this limestone in the soil?
The limestone is the soil.
Oh.
And so the vines grow in it, and they grab that limestone character through the end product of the wine, and there's an inverse relationship between limestone and the acidity in a wine because of limestone's pH level. And so we know that we'll create higher acidity wines if there's limestone in the soil.
And people found this out because you were talking about this was it Campania region, and people were finding this out, doing all of this even throughout the thousands of years of war and dictators taking over and
I suppose,
all of that.
But you have to imagine it in a different way. We haven't had the science to take a drop of wine and figure out its molecular details for very long. And so it's like the concept of alcohol and water 400 years ago. You grab water and you drink it, it could have bacteria and you can get sick. But they learned that if they blend it with alcohol, they don't get sick. They didn't know that if it was above 12% alcohol, the blend, that it'd kill the majority of bacteria. But they had learned through trial and error that if you put them together, you don't get cholera or dysentery. During those times, it wasn't the science that we could study to figure out molecularly exactly what was in it, but trial and error.
Okay, I see. So it's pretty much just
Only
trying
in the
to
last maybe 70 years have we been able to molecularly identify pH levels and sugar levels using absolute science and chemistry. Before that, it was all, 2,700, 2,800 years of trial and error and learning from before.
And that's what you're talking about the whole human history thing and a triumph to being humans and whatnot.
100%.
Because a lot of this has just been trial and error.
Intricate science. I mean, I've met the winemaker of Gary Farrell. Her name's Teresa, out of Sonoma. And she was a chemist. She got a chemistry degree and she went to college for chemistry. And she goes to a vineyard and, she's hanging out with winemakers and such. And she sees them testing this stuff. And she's like, I know all this. She's like, I've learned all this of chemistry. And next thing you know, she's a winemaker. You know what I'm saying? Because she understands the molecular detail of the science and chemistry of what happens on the finest detail between the relationship of yeast and the grape. And so she can take drops and put them in a machine and it will identify exact characteristics of that. And they can measure that from year to year to year to see whether they're creating consistent house blends or whether the acidity is higher in one year than the other, or free sulfur, or all the other little characteristics and details that can exist, phenolic compounds, anthocyanins, whatever else they can determine. They can find out molecularly what that wine is now. That obviously didn't exist 100 years ago.
So even with all that knowledge, can you still, each year, get, the exact same blend of wine?
You can make the same blend, but like humans, there could never be an exact duplicate from one year to another molecularly. There's just too many parts, too many pieces, many billions of molecules. There would never be the same recreation. A lot of that is outside of our control. And so the climate aspect, soil, slope, the makeups of your vineyard and your vines, those elements are going to have large determinations of the end product of the wine in any given vintage, as well as the climatic issues that you don't have control over.
I see.
And so there's always chaos, unbelievable amounts of chaos. And we've gotten so good through 3,000 years of trial and error, all the way up to the point of being able to break things down molecularly to their finest point in detail. We've gotten exceptional, again, at refining that chaos into beautiful order, year after year after year. I just poured the Greco de Tufo, as I had mentioned again, the Greco grape from Tufo. If I remember correctly, Tufo has pretty strong limestone soils and alluvial soils. Alluvial soils are soils that are pretty much along the shores of a river. Best way to think about it.
Okay.
They're like washed down minerality, and rivers tend to run from high points to low points. And so it's what's washed down from the high to the low. Alluvial soils. Greco is along a river, or the Greco de Tufo region is along a river, as well as the Fiano di Avellino. And you would find that most regions in Italy, of the 20 different states or regions they have, rivers are the defining characteristic of Italian wine.
I was noticing when you were showing me the map, most of these, especially the super regions you were talking about, they either have an ocean nearby or there's a bunch of rivers. So I'm guessing that has to...
100% it's the rivers. In Italy is a long leg, right, with a boot on the bottom that goes into the Mediterranean. And right down the middle of that leg is the Central Apennines and Southern Apennines, a mountain range that rises up to a point right through all of Italy. And from those points, rivers all the way down Italy to the ocean. Almost every premium wine region in Italy, from the south, Tuscany and Umbria and Marche down, slightly different in the northern Apennines and the Alps and their relationships in the north. But from, Tuscany, Umbria, and Marche down, almost every premium wine region in Italy follows a river. And you would find this to be a very, very, very common concept planet-wide. Bordeaux follows the Dordogne and Gironde into the estuary. The Loire is the longest river in France, 650 miles, and there are wine regions from the beginning all the way to the end into the Atlantic in Pays Nantes. Strasbourg River in Alsace, the Rhone River in southern Rhone. Most wine regions in Europe, the Mosel River in Germany, follow rivers. It is from high points where they go to exit by the ocean, which means water is always flowing down. It's always picking up the minerality from the top points and depositing it to the southern points. You have access to a water source for your vines, which is crucial. You mentioned close to the ocean. The closer you get to the ocean, more sand there is. Premium wine regions typically do not exist next to the ocean. Too consistent of climates, as we talked about, right? Mm-hmm. There aren't fluctuations, diurnal shifts. So you just don't have changes because the ocean mitigates temperature the same way a gigantic body of water would. Like a Lake Michigan, a Lake Erie. Giant lakes, right?
Right.
They have unbelievable wine regions next to those lakes because they're not oceans, which means they don't have incredible amounts of sand built up, although more sand. But to grow ice wine, you wouldn't pick your grapes till January. And you want an area.
Ice wine.
Ice wine means they pick the grape off, one grape at a time, frozen before the sun comes up, in tries or passes through the vineyard when they're ready.
Wow.
And then they make a tiny little bottle of super concentrated, super nectar, super high sugar dessert wine, ice wine. And in regions where it's cold, super cold, right, where the grapes would freeze, you don't want it to be so cold the vine freezes and cracks and splits. And so next to a big body of water, there aren't drastic falls in temperature, right?
Okay.
And so it never gets so cold next to Lake Erie, I guess, in a vineyard where they're growing ice wine Riesling grapes or what grapes they're growing for it. It never gets so cold that it would cause the vine themselves, the wood, to crack or break or damage the vine, but it gets cold enough to freeze the grape. Opposite when you're in Italy. If you're next to the ocean in Italy, you're not going to have a diurnal shift. There's not going to be a lot of shift between the temperature during the day or the night. And there's going to be really sandy soils, which for the most part, vines don't perform.
Define for the people who don't know, how do you pronounce it?
Diurnal shift. It's
diurnal
the difference
shift.
in the temperature between the day and the night. And as I had mentioned to you before, you want to make sure you're in a environment with grapes where while the sun's up, the metabolism of the vine is churning, which means it's eating its carbohydrate reserves and converting sugar and making sugar for the grapes. At night, when it gets cold, the metabolism slows down. And so you go through less carbohydrate reserves. You don't burn through those reserves when it's dark out, and you save those reserves for when the sun's out, the temperature's hotter. Now, if there's a continual period where it's always warm and the vine's always going through its carbohydrate reserves, it'll burn through its carbohydrate reserves. And then it'll start eating the acidity as food. And so the more you ripen the grape, the more the acidity goes down. And so you can slow down ripening by there being a time period at night where the temperature decreases to the point where the vine chills down and its metabolism slows down and it goes through less carbohydrates.
So you don't want a ripe grape.
You want a ripe grape, but you don't want a ripe grape at the expense of its acidity.
Okay.
In the wine world, we focus on two primary flavor profiles, sweet and sour first. And a great wine will have relatively ripened fruit or very ripened fruit, depending on the grape, and preserved acidity. And as we mentioned, some regions have the ability, like Campania, to have harvests that go into November because there aren't climatic issues. The diurnal shift is strong enough to where the vine's carbohydrates are preserved every single night when it gets dark and only become available during the day when it warms up. And yet it doesn't warm up to the point so much because of the elevation of those central Apennines and how they're planted on the mountain ranges that it burns through its carbohydrate reserves. So it maintains its carbohydrate reserves throughout the season to ripen and doesn't have to eat its acidity.
So based off of like the amount of water, the elevation of the mountain, the soil.
The average temperature.
Yeah.
Elevation is a huge thing in southern Italy because they have a mountain range, right? So they can mitigate the temperature by going higher, the same way we go into the mountains. It's 10 degrees cooler here in Colorado than down here on the plain.
Mm-hmm.
And because they can mitigate the temperature going up there, it slows down the ripening, so it preserves the acidity. So as I mentioned to you, there are a few super regions on Earth where you can ripen, preserve acidity, and the vineyard makes the integrated wine itself. And Campania has a few of those regions.
I'm curious, do you believe that like Italy is the best country or has the best regions for producing wine, or is it just some of them, or is it just have your favorite one in it, which is Campania? Like, what is because obviously, like you said, Campania is like your favorite region.
Well,
but do you think that there's one that produces the best?
That. It's really hard for me to say that. I've been told I am the person who knows more about Italy than anyone on earth who has never been there and is not Italian.
I was thinking about you.